I mean, there might be a point when my persistent defense of Israel's right to defend itself is altered by if I believe that the response is just being totally disproportionate. If, as some reports are suggesting, Israel is going to start attacking the south and doing to the south what it did to the north, there's going to be no Gaza left.
The whole issue all along is, right, what's the proportional response? And I think this is a point that can't be stated enough. What's the proportional response to Al-Qaeda flying planes into Twin Towers, killing 3,000 Americans? What's the proportional response to ISIS? The proportional response is, what is their threat? Their threat is not 3,000 people in Twin Towers. Their threat is that if they don't get destroyed when they've achieved that level of power, they're going to swell in their level of power. You're soon going to have 30,000 dead, which, by the way, was the original plan with the Twin Towers. Had there been the Twin Towers full, there could have been 30,000 dead people. Then there'll be 300,000 dead. And every time you say, oh, no, that's impossible, everybody thought 3,000 dead was impossible the day before it happened. And you suddenly realize these guys say they're going to go for 30,000 and 300,000 and 3 million and 30 million and 300 million. They're serious. They're going to work at it and they're going to get there. If you do not destroy them today, your war to destroy them tomorrow is going to be far worse, and there's going to be millions of dead people. When it comes to Hamas, the proportionate response is not the 1,200 who died. It's not to get 1,200 Hamas fighters. Just like the only proportionate response to Al-Qaeda was to completely destroy Al-Qaeda. All its tens or hundreds of thousands of soldiers, or at least all their command and everything, so they cannot inflict that type of damage anymore. The proportionate response to ISIS was to go and destroy ISIS. The proportionate response to Hamas is to go and destroy Hamas. Now, let's go back to the war against ISIS, because this is very important. In just 2 cities, the main cities where they fought them in many, many, many more cities. In Mosul, right, in Raqqa, the amount of civilians, the amount of people who died in that fight, right, was something like 15,000 people. I think in total it was about just over, 4,000 maybe actual ISIS fighters between those 2 cities, maybe a bit under, whatever the number, 3,700 or something like that. And the rest civilians, thousands and thousands of dead civilians. Large parts of Mosul were pulverized out of usability. To this day, the city is not fully recovered, right? And everybody understands how horrific and tragic all that is, okay? But everybody also understands that the proportionate response was the destruction of ISIS. In a world where ISIS has used so many human shields, the best case scenario cannot avoid a lot of civilian casualties. Right now, here in Gaza, I don't know what the numbers are, but usually post the war, it turns out something like 40-50% or something end up being Hamas fighters. By the way, many of the children are actually 17-year-old Hamas fighters. That's also happened in wars before. There'll also be a percentage that died from Hamas's own rockets that have landed in the Strip. There's been over 1,000 of those rockets, and we saw in just one hospital how many people can die from them. So there's a lot of civilians and tragedies of babies killed, children killed, women killed, men killed, who have been killed by Hamas own rockets, and then there'll be the civilian casualties, which is a tragedy.
Sorry, you're saying over 1,000 Hamas rockets have hit Gaza?
Yeah. You do the maths. I mean, the figures are there. I think it's something like 12% of all the rockets they fired at Israel, which is more than 10,000 rockets, have landed in Gaza. The IDF has the list of all the rockets that landed. It doesn't know how many died in each strike. But of course, but that's not my point. My point is, even if none of that's true, right? I think you have to get into mind, what's the proportionality here? The proportionality is, how do we save 9 million Israelis? And that's really, really important. There might be actually more than 9 million Israelis, because Hamas could kill non-Jewish Israelis too, as we saw. So maybe more. But the point is that what we saw Hamas doing over there is what they will do. But the point is, if Hamas is not destroyed now, they're going to be taking over the West Bank very quickly. They're already very, very active in the West Bank. It needs Israel all the time intervening to keep them from establishing anything like what they have in Gaza. And if they get to take over the West Bank, you've got Hezbollah in the north, you've got Hamas in the south, you've got the West Bank leaning on top of every major population center in Israel. If they would burst out the West Bank and attack Israel and go as deep as they went in that one day on October 7th, they wouldn't just cross a few little kibbutzim and farming villages. They would be deep inside the areas where millions of Israelis live. They would be at the coast. They would be in the middle of Tel Aviv. They would be in the middle of Jerusalem, in Herzliya, Netanya, and all. There would be millions of dead Israelis. That's what this war is to defend. Right? The Israelis are under far more danger from Hamas than Britain and America ever were from ISIS. And we did the right thing to destroy ISIS. And Israel's doing the right thing to destroy Hamas. Now, yes, is there a concern? How are they going to maneuver in the south with all the civilians there? The army's got to work that out, right? They've got to figure that one out. But of course, they've got to figure out, but that doesn't stop the moral obligation to destroy Hamas. And in any war to destroy 40,000 Hamas fighters, right? There's going to be civilian casualties. When they're using them as human shield, they're going to be civilian casualties, just like Britain and America faced when we were bombing ISIS in Mosul, and ended up being 9,000 civilian casualties to get rid of 2,500 fighters. By the way, some of those civilians were actually killed by ISIS. I think 2,000 were killed by ISIS. The rest probably died in coalition bombing and the fighting. Thousands, including thousands of children. But see, everybody there was very clear. ISIS has to be destroyed. Civilian casualties are a tragedy, right? We should never want any war ever because there's so many civilian casualties. But it's a necessary fight. It's the only morally right thing to do. As ISIS and Hamas present you with morally impossible choices. There is no nice choice. There's no good choice. There's no choice that doesn't involve massive death. Stopping the fighting now and letting Hamas come back to do more, that's the most immoral choice. And my hope is at some point, maybe Qatar can tell Hamas, look, you realize you're going to lose this militarily, all your leadership leave the country, disarm the guys there, let go of the hostages. That's probably a pipe dream that can't happen. But however horrific continuation of the war is, the only thing far more horrific than that is letting Hamas survive and be there to slaughter far more people tomorrow, take over the West Bank and create the most horrendous slaughter zone. The most horrific thing you could do is leave Hamas to go and be able to kill 9 million Israelis, men, women, and children, together with all the Iranian-backed forces surrounding Israel, arming themselves and training themselves to do exactly that.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, ultimately, even more Palestinians, because Israel will have to fight back, and it's just this ongoing cycle.
This is a war Israel spent 16 years avoiding. You talk about the blockade of Gaza, which people used horrible terms for. Now you realize what they were doing. They were trying to do. How many times did Hamas fire rockets at Israeli civilians? How many times did the residents around Gaza beg the army to go in and finish off Hamas? And the Israelis wouldn't do it. Why wouldn't they do it? Because they don't want Palestinian civilians to be dying. They don't want a war like this. It just became impossible to try and contain Hamas after October 7th. It became clear that strategy has now failed. If you don't destroy them, they will come and destroy sooner or later 9 million Israelis.